Hopefully you all can see my screen and we'll just get rolling. So I've lived now in 3 different states and I've done winter in 3 different states. And I have to admit, Maryland is a bit challenging. Nebraska has its wind, Wisconsin has its snow, but Maryland, you guys have a lot of yo-yoing temperatures. You have issues with temperature acclimation. We're going to talk about that today. All right, so some of the things we're going to talk about in this discussion is we're going to talk about different things you can do in your physical environment that can help make things easier for your animals over winter. I apologize. I've been bedding a lot of calves last couple of weeks, so I'm a little dusty. Bedding packs. We're going to talk about individual cattle management as far as acclimation, dealing with things like cold stress and yes, heat stress in the wintertime. Water accessibility and nutrition. So again, if you have any questions throughout, please just throw them in the chat box or say them. All right, let's talk about windbreaks. So windbreaks are pretty crucial. What's so important about windbreaks is they actually help lower the stress that your animals feel. They can improve the overall health of your animal if they're done right, and they increase feed efficiency because that feed that they're eating is going to maintaining their condition, building fat layers instead of just burning to keep them warm. Things we want to keep in mind about windbreaks though is they help us with what's called our critical temperature. As we know, critical means things are becoming dire. So depending on the hair coat of an animal, the critical temperature changes. Now this is important for Maryland more than other places I've lived because of the wild temperature swings you have here. You can have 50-degree temperature swings where it's 65, which if I looked at the temperature correctly, is some of the weather you guys had today, where you'll be down to the 30s at night. That's a really big temperature swing. And it's really hard to build a hair coat with that kind of temperature swing. So sometimes in the wintertime, you guys have fall hair coats and more of a light fall hair coat. So your critical temperatures are a lot higher than in places like the sandhills of Nebraska or here in Wisconsin, where we're down to 3 degrees, but we got there gradually. Okay. Things to keep in mind and why we have a windbreak is because windbreaks help take down that wind chill where your animals are. So while, again, today it was 45 degrees, the wind chill of 24, behind our wind blocks, it was much closer to 45 degrees. So we could feed less when we have wind blocks. Wind blocks can be, your windbreaks can be anything like trees, forests. You can have man-made windbreaks where you build fences with slats. So that way some air can come through. There's just a lot of different designs and you can do what works best for your farm. At the end of this presentation, there'll be a link on how to lay out windbreaks. All right, let's move on to bedded packs. So there's got to be some times where you need a place for the animal to go that's dry. We have a lot of mud and we have a lot of rain in the mid-Atlantic region, particularly in Maryland, especially in the wintertime. Here's some examples that we've built over the years where you store your hay or your straw bales. For those of you who calve in the fall, it's really important that you have a spot where your calves can go to get away from the elements because they're going to be much, much, much more prone to winter stress and cold stress than any of your cows are going to be. And they're not going to do well with the mud and the rain and the swinging temperatures. You're going to see an uptick in respiratory. So it's really important that you give them an opportunity to get out of the elements and stay dry. All right, let's talk about mud. Mud happens. Mud is a very common occurrence in Maryland in the wintertime. We like fluffy hair. Fluffy hair keeps animals warmer. It provides an insulating layer around your animals. It keeps them nice and warm. The thing about mud is it mats hair. Matted hair isn't as insulating. Matted hair causes your animals to be more chilled and stay chilled and have higher stress. Mud also carries bacteria and pathogens. So you have a higher incidence of illnesses, or you can have a higher incidence of illnesses if you have really muddy conditions and no ability for them to stay dry. Also, the thing about mud is it decreases their feed intake because they're less likely to want to move through that mud to get to their feed. And winter is not a time where we want animals to decrease their feed intake. All right, let's talk about acclimation. That's a struggle. It's a real struggle in Maryland. You guys have a lot of yo-yoing temperatures. It's really hard to acclimate. I found it out myself personally here. The great thing about winter in some parts of the country is once we get cold, we stay cold. And we generally get there pretty gradually. Days get longer. So the animals start to slowly grow hair, eat more, build a fat layer, start to be accustomed to cooler weather. You know, the metabolism slows down, so they build more fat. In a perfect world, that's how it works and how it's supposed to work. It's very hard to acclimate when you have wild temperature swings consistently throughout winter. I mean, you have 75 degrees days in February, those heat stress days. So it's very hard for your animals to acclimate. So you're going to have to do a little bit more on your end to give them an assist, so to speak. So let's talk about cold stress first before we jump into heat stress. All right, so when does it happen? Well, thinner cattle are going to get stressed faster. Okay, so anything less than a body condition score of 5. And if you're unfamiliar with body condition scoring, there's also a link at the end of the presentation that can walk you through body condition scoring. But just as a quick intro, body condition score 5 means you can barely see the last rib or two on your animal. And with that heavy hair coat, it's gonna be really hard to see. So, you know, it's you shouldn't see any ribs. A really key group to keep an eye on is your 2-year-olds. Your 2-year-olds, especially if you just pulled the calves off and you just weaned, they're going to be a little on the thinner side. And so they're going to get stressed a lot faster than your older brood cows. If it's possible, feed them separately. And if you can't, you're going to have to put out enough feed that your boss cows aren't going to push them around as much. Or they can still eat enough even if they get pushed around. And also, we're back on that rain issue that happens in Maryland and the mid-Atlantic. Wet hair coats, anything under 53 to 54 degrees is going to be critical. Cold stress, they're going to be stressed. You're going to have to feed them more. And if there's muddy, matted hair, that temperature jumps up. So if it's muddy and chilly, 57 degrees, which isn't that chilly to us, but if they've got muddy, wet conditions, you're going to have to feed them more because they're going to get chilled faster. Ways to potentially prevent cold stress outside of building a wind block, outside of doing bedded packs, is to maintain body condition score. It's one of the easiest ways for you to help your animals with cold stress. Make sure they're all at least a 5, if not higher. Because the thing is, when your animals have a body condition score of 5 and have that nice heavy hair coat, they can do just fine on your normal ration down to temperatures of 19 degrees. Which doesn't happen that often in Maryland. So you don't have to do a lot of additional supplementation. But if your animals are on the thinner side, say a 4, now you're at 27 degrees where it becomes critical. And that's in perfect conditions with a heavy hair coat. Not a lot of cows in Maryland get that super, super heavy hair coat. So your critical temperature is going to be a little higher. Okay, and then another really big thing you want to do is when it's colder or you think your animals are experiencing cold stress, decrease the amount of traveling they have to do. Pen them in closer by water, pen them in closer by feed. Don't make them burn energy that they don't have to get to their feed and their water. All right, let's jump into heat stress. Just because it's winter doesn't mean heat stress doesn't happen. While they don't have summer coats, and sometimes they don't have that heavy winter coat, they still have thicker hair than they normally have. And you can start getting some heat stress issues at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If there's any mud, again, not allowing that hair to cool them off, you're going to have, heat stress in the 60s. It's something to be very aware of. And we're not even going to talk about feed as far as, fescue toxicity and anything like that as far as causing heat. This is just strictly environmental temperatures. You need to be concerned a little bit about when temperatures get in that upper 60s, 70s. Also, if you're trailering your animals, they produce a lot of body heat. If you pack a bunch in that trailer and you don't have them properly ventilated, or have any slats open, you're going to have issues as well as them, getting some heat incidences. Also, if you bring them in a building, if you work them in a building and you're packing them in those pens to work them through a chute, also keep in mind, don't pack them too tight. They produce a lot of body heat and they're meant to be outside. They've got a thicker hair coat. So try to keep that in mind if you have to work them. Some tips to dealing with heat stress is make sure they have access to shade. I know as silly as it sounds, when those hotter days, I mean, they seem nice for us sometimes to have 70s in February, get a break from any cold. They're going to need a little bit of shade, plenty of water. I mean, so plenty of fresh, cool water. It'll help rebound so fast. Don't haul too many animals on your trailer. Take a couple loads if you need to, if you have to trailer. And if you have to pen animals indoors, make sure that you have really, really good airflow through your barns. Not only do you have a heat issue, but you have a potential humidity issue, which can lead to respiratory problems and pneumonia. So you have to pen indoors in the wintertime. Make sure you have really, really good ventilation and you keep it cool in there as possible. That might even mean having to put fans out. All right, let's talk about water, that vital nutrient, even when it's not summer. Always have clean access to water. Don't rely on snow. They burn way too much energy trying to use snow for water. When they have increased feed intake, which we have them do in wintertime to maintain their energy, they need an increased water to help with digestion, just how the system works. For example, if you notice your animals are eating less and it's cold out in the wintertime, it's probably because they're not getting enough water. So the water's too far. The conditions are icy and they don't want to go get water. If they've dropped down their feed intake and you've noticed a noticeable difference, it's because they're not drinking enough water. Okay, make sure you have adequate space. You get ice buildup around these waters and boss cows and you've got issues. So make sure that you're cleaning the ice up and you're giving them plenty of space to drink water. And also make sure that that water isn't ice cold. Cows won't drink water if it's too cold in the wintertime. Make sure it's between 45 and 65. Average well temperatures are about 52 to 58. So just make sure you wrap a little heat tape around those water lines to keep them relatively warm as they're traveling through. Things that are going to discourage them from drinking, again, if you're noticing they've gone off feed a little bit, it might be because it's really cold. They are high winds. They've got to fight through rain, ice, mud to get to the water, or if they have to travel long distances. In a perfect world, when it's sunny and nice, animals still don't want to walk a long way for water. When conditions aren't good, they're going to walk even shorter distances. So make sure they don't have to work that hard to get water or walk that far, because they just won't. Or they'll all go as a group and then they'll fight for the water and then you'll have a whole nother problem to deal with. Different types of waters. So the black water up in the corner, that doesn't require any energy, so no electricity, and it's very well insulated. So you can use that one if you're in an area where you have gravity fed water, but you don't have electricity. The middle Racheal one it's really good at preventing freezing water. The Racheal one on the corner is actually a frost free. So that one can freeze up sometimes in the wintertime. So it's just frost free on the top, but it can freeze on the inside. If you use that style water, make sure that you're using a heat tape on your water line, which you can plug into electricity so you keep the water flowing. The two at the bottom are actually for water tanks. You can use a surface one, which is the red one at the bottom. Those work really well when you don't have super cold conditions. And then the other one is one that heats from the bottom. That one can be a bit of a challenge if you have really cold days because the water will freeze from the surface down and can be a challenge to thaw. But again, there's a lot of different waters you can use for your farm and your operation. Just choose what works for you. There's also heated hoses you can do that you can plug in. You can run heated hoses if you need to. I always recommend keeping one handy because then you'll always have a hose that's thawed. If for some reason you forgot to clean out your hoses and they froze up on you. Let's do a quick talk about nutrition. Basically, what we're going to go over is that they're going to need more food. When temperatures drop and you hit their lower critical temperature line that we went over with the windbreaks, when you hit those lines, you need to feed them more. And it's more important in Maryland that we focus a little bit on hair coat. Hair coat plays a lot in it here because there are times where the animals, depending on region you're in, whether you're in Southern Maryland, Eastern Shore, you're not going to get that heavy winter coat. So your critical temperature is going to be different than, you know, say Western Maryland or even in Southern Pennsylvania, not on the Western side. You guys all have slightly different critical temperatures for your individual animals based on the hair coat they have. So you need to keep that in mind when you're deciding how much to feed your animals. Another tip to keep in mind is what time you're feeding them. I mean this in two ways. I mean the time of year, as far as if you have animals that aren't quite in the condition you want them to be, you should really focus, and this is on gestating animals, not lactating animals. So if you're a fall calver, it's going to be difficult to put condition on because she's lactating. But when she's gestating, it's a lot easier to put condition on in the second trimester, because the third trimester of gestation is calf growth. So if you're pouring feed on her to get her condition up, what you're doing is you're risking increasing that calf size. So you could have calving issues. So you want to back it up and try to put condition on her early on in a gestation if you can. Lactating, you're not going to have to worry about increasing calf size because the goal obviously is have a bigger calf. Another thing that I mean when I'm saying time of feeding is try to feed later at night or towards dusk. I know it's not fun to feed when it's dark, getting dark out. They use headlamps and stuff. But the thing is, when your animals eat later at night, that means they're digesting or ruminating later at night. And rumination actually produces a lot of body heat for an animal. So you're actually helping them stay warmer overnight, you know, when it's colder, than having them burn heat during the day ruminating. So if you can, try to push your feeding time towards later in the day or dusk. If you work till 4, feed them after you get home from work, kind of thing. Or just try to feed them later, 4 or 5 at night. We have no idea what the winter is going to look like this year. It could be a mild one. It could be one that slams us later in January and February. But hopefully some of these tips help make your winter a little less trying and a little bit more easier to deal with. And here's a list of resources that you can use that'll walk through this stuff a little bit more specifically. Sarah's going to actually be sending you out this presentation for you guys with the links. So if you need to use them, I highly recommend. They're really, really good resources to help you with getting through this winter. Does anybody have any questions?